You're sitting in your car, hands still shaking. The call ended 5 minutes ago. You explained. You justified. You tried to prove you were right, sentence after sentence, detail after detail, as if enough logic would finally make them understand and apologize. They didn't apologize. And now, in the silence of your engine ticking as it cools, you notice something more unsettling than the argument itself. The more you talked, the weaker you felt. Has that ever happened to you? Explaining, justifying, trying to prove your point, only to realize the more you said, the more you lost. 2,000 years ago, a group of people faced this exact problem. Not in a car, but in the political arena of Rome, where one wrong word could cost you your life. They called themselves Stoics. And they found a solution that runs completely against your instincts. That solution wasn't speaking better. It wasn't sharper comebacks. It was something almost nobody teaches you how to use: silence, at the right moment, in the right way. Fan 2. Over the next 30 minutes, you're going to learn 3 silent weapons that the strongest minds in history used so they never had to lower themselves to explain anything to people who didn't deserve to hear it. And near the end of this video, I'll tell you about a Roman man who was struck in the middle of a crowded public bathhouse, in front of hundreds of witnesses, and whose reaction made his attacker come crawling back to apologize. But first, let's talk about why you, yes, you, find silence so difficult in the first place. It's not because you're weak. It's not because you lack courage. You find silence difficult because your brain is wired to do the exact opposite. When someone insults you, attacks you, misunderstands you, your body reacts as if it's under real physical threat. Your heart rate spikes. Your throat tightens. And a voice inside you screams, say something, defend yourself, don't let them think that about you. You've typed out long messages explaining a small misunderstanding, deleted them, and rewritten them 3 times. You've sat in a meeting, listened to someone take credit for your work, and felt your entire body want to jump up an object right there. You've lain awake at midnight replaying an argument, inventing the perfect comeback you wish you'd said in the moment. None of that is your fault. It's a million-year-old survival instinct, misfiring in a modern situation where the threat isn't a wild animal, it's just a comment, a text message, a dismissive look. The problem is, in most modern situations, that instinct is betraying you. So today, I'm not going to tell you to just calm down. You've heard that 1,000 times and it's never once worked. Instead, I'm going to give you 3 specific silent weapons the Stoics used, not to avoid conflict, but to reclaim power inside it. The first weapon will teach you how to turn silence into a boundary, not a weakness. The second will reveal an uncomfortable truth about who is actually afraid in most arguments. And the third, the one almost nobody talks about, will show you that silence can be the strongest offensive move you have, not just a defensive one. Let's start with the thing 90% of people get completely wrong. Here's what almost everyone gets wrong: they think silence means you're hiding, losing, refusing to face the moment. The truth is the exact opposite. In the handbook his students compiled from his teachings, the Enchiridion, the philosopher Epictetus laid out a simple rule for living. Let silence be your general rule, he said, or say only what is necessary, and say it in as few words as possible. Notice the word rule. Not sometimes. Not only when you feel outmatched. He called silence the default, the place you return to, not the place you retreat to once you've run out of things to say. Epictetus wasn't born into comfort, handing down wisdom from a life of ease. He had been enslaved in Rome. He knew exactly what it felt like to have no power at all, no property, no status, not even control over his own body. And it was precisely in that condition that he realized something: the one thing no one can ever take from you is your choice of whether to speak or to hold your tongue. Now think about that a different way. A boundary isn't a wall you build out of fear. It's a line you draw because you respect yourself. When you stay silent in the face of an insult, you're not saying, "I have nothing to say back." You're saying, this conversation doesn't deserve my energy. That's the difference between a door closed out of fear, and a door closed because you've decided who gets to walk into the living room of your emotions. Picture your mind as a house. Inside that house is a living room, the place where you welcome worthy guests, meaningful conversations, honest feedback that helps you grow. But you also have every right not to open the door to anyone who knocks. A stranger shouting insults from the street doesn't earn a seat in your living room just because they're loud. Silence, in Epictetus's sense, is that door. You don't owe anyone an explanation simply because they demand one. You don't owe anyone a debate just because they provoked you. A boundary doesn't need to be announced out loud. Sometimes the strongest boundary is the absence of a reaction at all. And here's the interesting part, people who try to break your boundaries, with insults, provocations, deliberate needling, they're counting on a reaction. That reaction, whether it's anger or a defensive explanation, is a kind of open door. When you don't open it, they have nothing left to grab onto. Nothing to pull you into their game. This isn't just a theory. Think about the last time you stayed silent in the face of an unfair criticism, and that small but unmistakable sense of power you felt, realizing the other person was waiting for a reaction you simply didn't give them. That's the boundary at work. Now let me ask you something directly. The last time you felt you had to prove you were right, no matter what, do you know where that feeling actually came from? Here's an uncomfortable truth, the need to prove yourself, in most cases, doesn't come from strength. It comes from insecurity. Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor, ruler of one of the most powerful empires in human history, wrote his private reflections not to publish them, not to prove anything to anyone. He wrote them for himself, at night, in the exhausted lull between military campaigns on the empire's northern frontier. In one entry, Book 4, Section 3 of the Meditations, he reminds himself of something: you always have the option of having no opinion about a thing. You don't have to let your soul be disturbed by matters outside your control. Those things aren't asking to be judged by you. Leave them alone. Pause on that for a second. You always have the option of having no opinion. The most powerful man in the world at that time, someone who could order anyone's execution with a single word, was reminding himself that he didn't have to react to everything. If a Roman emperor didn't need to prove himself right against every criticism aimed at him, why do you feel like you have to prove yourself over a comment on social media, or a snide remark from a coworker? The answer lies here: when you feel compelled to explain, to justify, to argue back, that usually means some part of you doesn't fully believe in your own worth. If you were completely grounded inside, a stranger's words wouldn't carry enough weight to shake you. You wouldn't need their vote to know who you are. This isn't a criticism of you. This is something nearly everyone experiences, because we're taught from childhood that silence in the face of an accusation equals admission of guilt. But that's a psychological trap, not the truth. Think about the people you genuinely admire for their composure. Are they the ones with a ready comeback for every attack? Or are they the ones who can hear an unfair criticism, smile, and keep living exactly the way they choose, without needing a public trial to prove their innocence? That's real freedom. Not freedom from criticism. Criticism will always exist, but freedom from the need to respond to every single piece of it. And here's the part most people miss entirely: every time you try to prove yourself right to someone who has no genuine interest in understanding you, you're handing them the power to decide your worth. You turn yourself from the owner of the truth into someone begging for permission to be believed. The Stoics called this the difference between what's within your control and what isn't. What other people think of you, that's not within your control, no matter how much you explain. How you respond, that's the only thing you truly own. Now let me tell you something almost no video about staying calm ever mentions. Every time you engage in an unnecessary argument, you're not just losing time. You're draining something far more precious, your inner stillness. Picture your mind like a battery. Every morning you wake up with a certain amount of energy to spend on things that actually matter: your work, the people you love, the goals you're chasing. Every unnecessary fight, every explanation you give to someone who never wanted to listen, every time you scroll down just to argue back with a stranger, all of it drains a piece of that battery, and none of it ever gets returned. The Stoics understood this more deeply than you might expect. They had a concept called ataraxia, an untroubled stillness of mind. This isn't cold indifference. It's the state where your mind resembles a lake with no ripples, not because there's no wind at all, but because you've learned not to let every small gust disturb the entire surface. And here's the crucial part: you cannot reach that state if you keep allowing every provocation, every bit of malice, every small misunderstanding the right to pull you into a battle. Think about the last time you spent an entire evening trading messages in an argument on social media. How did you feel afterward? Victorious? Or exhausted, hollowed out, and worse, still thinking about it even after you'd put the phone down? That's the real cost of not knowing how to stay silent. It's not that you lost the argument. It's that you paid far too high a price for something that was never worth anything to begin with. The Stoics believed time was the most valuable asset you have, more valuable than money, because money can always be earned back, but a moment lost to a pointless argument is gone forever. Every time you choose silence over an unnecessary fight, you're buying back your own time and energy. This isn't weakness. This is conscious resource management. A skilled general doesn't send troops into every battle he's invited to. He chooses carefully, because he knows resources are limited, and the battle that truly matters is still waiting ahead. You're no different. Your mind is the most valuable battlefield you own. Don't let anyone, a stranger online, a coworker who enjoys provoking you, a family member quick to criticize, get in there for free. Now let me tell you the story I promised at the start of this video, the one about the bathhouse. There was a Roman statesman named Cato. History calls him Cato the Younger, to distinguish him from his great-grandfather. He was famous throughout Rome for an almost unshakable integrity, impossible to bribe, impossible to intimidate, impossible to bend with power or money. One day, at a public bathhouse, where Roman aristocrats gathered to socialize and unwind, a man, over some misunderstanding, punched Cato right in front of dozens of witnesses. Stop and picture that scene. You're struck, in a public place, in front of others. Your honor, something Roman society valued above almost anything else, even life itself, is violated openly. Anyone's instinct would be to strike back immediately, or at the very least demand an apology, a punishment. What did Cato do? He said nothing at all. No reaction. He didn't even demand the man be punished. Later, when someone asked why he hadn't pressed charges against the man who struck him, Cato replied that he didn't remember being hit at all. Think about the power in that answer. He didn't say, "I forgive you," that would still quietly acknowledge an injury worth forgiving. He said he didn't remember. Meaning the incident was so small it wasn't even worth a place in his mind. And what happened next is even more remarkable. The man who had struck Cato, ashamed in the face of such extraordinary composure, came back and apologized to him. Think about that again. Cato didn't need to say a single word to win that encounter. His absolute silence, his refusal to give the humiliation any weight at all, was more powerful than any sharp comeback he could have delivered. If he'd struck back, gotten angry, demanded justice, the story would have ended in a brawl or a courtroom. But by reacting with nothing at all, he turned his own attacker into the one who had to bow and apologize. This is what I want you to carry with you. Sometimes the most powerful response isn't a sharp reply at all. It's the complete absence of a reaction, a silence so total it speaks for itself. You don't have to be an emperor or a philosopher to do this. You just need one moment, just one, to pause before reacting, and ask yourself, does this deserve my attention, or am I about to let something small occupy space in my mind that it hasn't earned? So how do you bring 2,000-year-old principles like these into your modern life, where you have social media, work group chats, and family dinners that sometimes feel more tense than any boardroom? Imagine someone texts you something insulting right now. Your phone buzzes. You read the message, and heat rises in your face. Your thumbs are already hovering over the keyboard, ready to type a sharp reply. This is the moment to apply Epictetus's rule: let silence be your default. That doesn't mean never responding, it means not responding immediately, while your emotions are still running the show. Put the phone down. Give yourself a pause, maybe 5 minutes, maybe an hour. If you still feel the need to respond afterward, respond with as few words as possible, and with a clear head, not with anger. At work, this situation shows up even more often. A coworker takes credit for your idea in a meeting. An email arrives with a tone far sharper than it needed to be. Your instinct is to fire back immediately, so no one thinks you can be pushed around. But remember what Marcus Aurelius reminded himself: you always have the option of having no opinion about a thing. You don't need to react in that meeting right away. You can observe, take note, and choose the timing and the manner of your response, instead of letting a passing emotion decide for you. A composed reply, delivered after real thought, always carries more weight than an outburst fired off in the heat of the moment. And at home, where the wounds often cut deeper because the bonds are closer, this principle matters even more. A careless comment from a parent. A criticism from a partner. A hurtful remark from a child going through a rebellious phase. The instinct is to strike back immediately, to teach them a lesson. But most of the time, that only deepens the wound on both sides. Try this: the next time someone in your family says something that hurts you, instead of firing back instantly, take a breath and ask yourself the question Cato might have asked himself: is this something I'll still need to remember tomorrow? If the answer is no, let it go, the way Cato didn't remember the punch he took. If the answer is yes, then speak, but speak with composure, not with a burst of raw anger. That's the difference between silence out of weakness, and silence chosen deliberately, because you're picking the wisest moment and manner to respond. This isn't about suppressing your emotions. It's about mastering the gap between feeling and action, a gap that, once you learn to control it, will change every relationship in your life. Let's go back to you, sitting in that car, hands still shaking after the call. Now imagine that same moment again, except this time, you already know the 3 silent weapons. You know silence isn't avoidance, it's a boundary you set yourself, the right to decide who's allowed into the living room of your emotions. You know the need to prove yourself right at all costs usually comes from insecurity, not strength, and you don't need anyone else's vote to know your own worth. And you know, as Cato proved in the middle of a public bathhouse 2,000 years ago, that sometimes the strongest response is the complete absence of one. The Stoics didn't stay silent because they had nothing to say. They stayed silent because they understood something you may never have considered before: every time you explain yourself to someone who doesn't deserve to hear it, you hand them a piece of the power over your emotions. And starting today, you don't have to do that anymore. Let me say this one final time, slowly, because I want it to stay with you longer than the rest of this video. Every single day, someone will try to provoke you. Someone will say something unfair about you. Someone will try to drag you into a fight you never chose to be part of. You don't owe them an explanation. You don't owe them your attention. You don't owe them the right to decide how you feel about yourself. Real strength isn't measured by how sharp your comeback can be. It's measured in the moment you look a provocation directly in the eye and choose to give it no room in your mind at all. Just like Cato, standing in that public bathhouse, choosing not to remember the punch he'd just taken. Not because he was weak, but because he knew exactly what deserved the attention of a free mind, and what didn't. From today on, every time you feel pressure to react, to explain, to prove yourself, remember this moment. Remember that silence, chosen deliberately, isn't the absence of strength. It is strength itself. So what about you? Are you someone who chooses silence when insulted, or someone who always feels the need to fire back immediately? Drop a comment below, type silence if you believe its power, or speak up if you think the opposite. I'll be reading and replying to every single one. And if this video changed the way you see silence, hit subscribe right now. Because next week, I'm bringing you another Stoic lesson, on why the strongest people in history are often also the most misunderstood, and how they never let that break them. See you in the next video.